There are books that teach you something new. And then there are books that ask you to bury something old. Not in a dramatic, throw it all away kind of way, but in the quiet, aching sense that something inside you no longer holds. A belief, a way of seeing the world, a version of yourself you were proud of. For me, No Name in the Street was one such book. It didn't just rearrange my politics. It helped me write a eulogy for a self I wasn't quite ready to lose. The self who still believed political engagement, my engagement, was part of a larger moral engine. That if we just worked hard enough, voted loud enough, believed long enough, that things would shift. But Baldwin forced me to ask, what if that hope was a coping mechanism? What if that certainty was just a story I told myself to keep from falling apart? And here's the thing that I want to sit with in this video. Not just what reading can give us, but what it takes. Because brave reading isn't just about pushing through discomfort. It's about what you're willing to let die and whether you're ready to grieve the version of yourself that book leaves behind. I'm Nick. This is DrCrankyPantsReads, and sometimes brave reading means lighting a candle for the self you used to be. Let's take a minute to talk about a theory that cracked something open for me. It starts with Ernest Becker's The Denial of Death. The core idea that humans spend a lot of their energy avoiding the fact that we are going to die. Like, die. Like, cease to exist, die. And to cope with that knowledge, we construct elaborate belief systems, religions, ideologies, moral codes, even career paths that make our lives feel meaningful. Becker argues that these systems don't just comfort us, they protect us. Hence, terror management theory, or TMT for short. Years later, Sheldon Solomon, Jeff Greenberg, and Tom Pyszczynski picked that up in The Worm at the Core. It lays out the research. People reminded of their own mortality become more defensive of their worldview. They cling harder to political or religious identities. Even trivial reminders can change how we vote, how we spend, or how we react. If we know we're doing this, then we can start to ask, what happens when a book threatens that belief system? What happens when the thing we built to feel stable starts to shake under us? And that's where Hartmut Rosa's The Uncontrollability of the World adds something essential. Rosa says we're obsessed with control over time, identity, even our emotional state. And when something resists that control, a person, a memory, a book, it destabilizes us. It reminds us that we are not in charge. And that is terrifying. Reading bravely doesn't just mean letting go of control over the narrative. It means letting go of the version of yourself that needed that control. A good book can make you feel seen. A braver book might make you feel unmade. So what does this actually look like? Let's start with teaching, because being a teacher means walking people, often gently, through the death of ideas they didn't know they were clinging to. Take learning styles. My students arrive thinking they're visual or auditory learners. It gives them a framework, a label. But in class, we run experiments. We test how they actually learn, not how they've been told they learn. And when the results don't line up with their self-perception, that's not just interesting. It's upsetting. Because I'm not just asking them to revise a fact. I'm asking them to let go of a belief they've used to understand their own mind. And that realization, it comes with grief. It's not just students. I've felt this too. When I first encountered this new wave of the science of reading, I had to reevaluate practices I had once believed in. And then there's Lucy Calkin's The Art of Teaching Reading, which when I first read it during my undergrad years, it gave me vision. It gave me hope. And now I still see what it offers, but I also see what it misses. And revisiting it doesn't feel like coming home. It feels like walking through a house I used to live in and realizing I couldn't move back in even if I wanted to. That's belief grief. So if we know what belief grief looks like, where do we see it being avoided? Because BookTube loves a hard-hitting read. We love to say something wrecked us, gutted us, left us ruined. We talk about trauma, injustice, devastation, but we rarely talk about what comes after. We rarely ask, did it change you? Not just how you felt, but how you live, how you spend, how you vote, how you show up in your relationships, what you stop doing, what you started mourning. Because reading is easy to perform, but transformation is not. And the truth is, we do avoid books that might actually require something of us. Or sometimes we walk in ready, confident, open, and a book still undoes us. That was my experience with Work Will Not Love You Back by Sarah Jaffe. This is a book about how capitalism weaponizes care, especially in professions like teaching, nonprofit work, the arts, and retail. Jaffe interviews workers across these fields, and the argument is clear. When love becomes the justification for labor, exploitation gets disguised as passion. I didn't avoid this book. If anything, I expected it to confirm what I already believed about labor and capitalism. But what it did instead was peel back layers I didn't know were there. It didn't just critique the usual villains. It asked me to look at the spaces I believed in. Nonprofit work, teaching, union organizing, mission-driven roles where I had tied my identity to my usefulness. And suddenly I had to ask, what part of my labor is about liberation? And what part of my labor is about performance, about being needed, about being looked at as good? That was a belief death I was not prepared for. And then came Poverty by America by Matthew Desmond. This is a book about poverty as a deliberate outcome, not a glitch, not a broken system, but the result of choices that benefit some people while trapping others. I read a lot about equality. I read a lot about inequality. I teach about structural injustice. And I thought I was ready. But Desmond doesn't just analyze poverty. He implicates us in it. He shows how even well-intentioned people benefit from cheap labor, subsidized services, and housing policies that quietly exclude. He made me realize that even my progressive life, my values, my choices were still, to some extent, structured around comfort, around control. And that made me uncomfortable in a way I still haven't quite shaken. And then there's fiction, because this isn't just a nonfiction phenomenon. The novel that did this to me was Detransition Baby by Torrey Peters. At first glance, it's about 3 people, 2 trans, 1 cis woman, caught in a complicated proposal to co-parent a baby. But what it's really about is the messiness of gender, of care, identity, and survival. It doesn't try to resolve. It doesn't moralize. It doesn't offer clarity as comfort. I picked it up thinking I knew where I stood. I had my politics, I had my language, I had my beliefs. And this book sat me down and said, what if that's not enough? What if your alignment has made you stop asking better questions? It made me see where I had become too comfortable, where I had let fluency become a substitute for curiosity, where I thought the right vocabulary meant I didn't have anything left to learn. And there was grief there too. Not because the book asked me to give something up, but because it reminded me of the risks of intellectual complacency. That's belief grief. That's brave reading. Not always the books that wreck us, but the ones that leave us sitting with the complexity and refusing to tidy it up. And once you see that, once a book rearranges you like that, you can't unsee it. And here's the part no one really talks about. It hurts. It hurts to realize you were doing your best and still contributing to harm. It hurts to let go of the comforting idea that good intentions were enough. It hurts to realize that real change might mean losing something. A belief, a system, a role, a self. That is grief. Not the sobbing in your car kind, but the quiet, slow kind. The kind where you realize the world is more complicated than you thought. And that complexity doesn't resolve. It just deepens. That's what brave reading does. It doesn't just add knowledge, it subtracts certainty. And it asks you to live in that space that is left. So what happens after the belief dies? Not the rupture, but the after. The quiet. The space where something used to be. Because grief doesn't end when the book does. You carry it and you wrestle with it. And you start making different choices without realizing why. You reread a book and notice it doesn't fit anymore. You open your mouth to say something and realize you don't believe in that thing anymore. That's not about shame. That's about integration. It looks like asking better questions. Not, was I wrong? But what did that belief protect me from? And maybe even, what am I strong enough to face now? Because if we go back to terror management theory, those beliefs weren't just ideas. They were scaffolding, and they were safety. They were the story we told ourselves to hold off the chaos. But stories, they have chapters, and sometimes you have to let the old ones end. And so what does it look like to live without that scaffolding? To move through the world with one less illusion of control, to sit in uncertainty without filling it with certainty. That's what I've been thinking about. And it's made me wonder that if we can romanticize our lives, set the mood, light the candles, cue the playlist, then maybe we can theorize our lives too. Maybe belief isn't the end of knowing, and maybe really it's the beginning of deeper knowing. And maybe letting your old self rest isn't rejection or loss or failure. Maybe it's just becoming. So here's what I want to leave you with. Not a takeaway, but a question. What part of you has a book asked you to let go of? Not because it was wrong, but because it couldn't carry you forward. And when that part of you died, did you grieve it? Did you even notice the loss before the rebuilding began? Because I think we need to make space for that. to light a candle for the self you used to be, to let books not just move us, but remake us, to see grief not as evidence that something's gone wrong, but as proof that something real has changed. Because if there's nothing to lose, is it really brave? If there's no grief, was it ever a risk? I'm personally not done thinking about this. I'm still sitting with it. But I know this much. Brave reading isn't just about hard books. It's about what they leave behind. And if that's where you are, grieving, rebuilding, rethinking, you're not alone. You're not broken. You're just between selves. And that's pretty brave too. I appreciate you. I hope you're taking care of yourself. And I'll see you in the next one.